Ladies and gentlemen, welcome today to our podcast with a very special guest. We have Lisa Novak, the co-founder and sales agent of Novak Properties, a business that she co-founded with Mark 20 years ago.
20, can't believe it.
Yep.
Long time ago.
Formerly, prior to that, not in real estate. So great entry into the industry with a very dominant brand in the Northern Beaches, a brand that I've personally been following for a long time, for my whole tenure in the mortgage broking industry. So Lisa, welcome on board.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So you've become quite a dominant figure in the real estate industry, I'd say. People probably know you around the country. You've, in my opinion, been a pioneer of socials. Your content is really coming up quite regularly on all various channels. And I imagine also, if you don't mind me saying, in today's woke environment, you could say that it would have been tough for you to be that dominant person in a very male-dominant industry, right?
Correct.
So let's firstly touch on your story. How you got up and running and how it was in that probably entry period as such, and then we'll go into some stuff about your market insights. So,
Perfect.
How's it been?
Good, really good. So just to give everyone a little bit of context, I was always working in the background of our business. As you mentioned, Theo, 20 years ago, we started Novak Properties, and we were always doing things differently. Mark, my husband, and I have always been really innovative. So we've always gone against the grain. And at that time, 20 years ago, we decided to start an independent agency as opposed to going with a franchise, because we just thought we can't conform.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, because 20 years ago, no one would think of the sort. The go-to concept was become an LJ Hooker or a Ray White or a McGrath franchise, right?
Well, it was safe. Everything came packaged up. It's like, there's your brand, there's your colours, here's your letterheads, here's everything. So it was always safe, but we were like, we're just not going to be able to conform.
What do you mean by that? What did you not want to conform with?
So we just wanted a very, very unique brand. And even, you walk into our office, much like your office, when I walked in here today, we didn't want to have an office that looked like a real estate agency. And I remember when we opened up, it was actually called the Novak Agency back 20 years ago. But I remember when we opened it up and everyone was walking in the door going, what are you guys? Are you a modelling agency? Are you a recruitment agency? We had no photos on the windows.
Yeah, you've got a unique office. You've always had a unique office.
And at that time, it doesn't sound like a big deal now, but at that time people were like, this is just weird, that you're not having these for sale properties in your window. But at that time, we had a slushy machine. We had a reception area that looked nothing like a reception area. Everything was very open planned. Going back 20 years ago, everyone was in offices. And then we just sort of grew from there. Now you fast forward 20 years and our office looks like a bar. In fact, people will often walk in trying to order G&Ts. We have a 6-metre antipasto bar. That's our reception area.
Yeah, I've been to that bar.
And an indoor garden and, all sorts of things. But a big part of that transformation over the years has been social media.
So can I ask, there's people in the real estate industry that have been in the industry for several years and wouldn't make a ambitious and confident move like you did with no prior experience to set up a real estate business from the get-go, right? And also as bold as, ignoring the support offerings in the industry like the franchise groups and just running with your own brand.
Yep.
Now, whilst you had no experience, your husband, Mark, had experience, but
correct.
also quite minimal, right? How many years had he been operating in the industry at the time?
Well, Mark's been in the industry now all up just on 30 years, so quite a long time. He launched into real estate pretty much fresh out of school.
Okay, so 10 years at the time. So that was actually a lengthy amount of experience to
Correct.
make a confident decision.
Yeah, but had absolutely no experience in running an office. And in fact, I remember, and we were almost forced into it in many ways because Mark got fired from his job and he was the number one sales agent for the professionals group at the time across New South Wales. So he was a big writing agent. And I remember when he got fired and we were like, well, we'll just go open our own agency. He was 23 years of age.
Oh, wow.
And I said, you know how to run a business, don't you? And he was like, no. I said, you've managed people before? No. I was like, great, let's give it a go then. And off we went.
What a love story. You know, now we're going into the category of romance here. Well, the first ever on the podcast. That's beautiful. Tell me, now I want to touch on, because it's heavily, sort of recognised and spoken about these days, real estate, sales in general, not just real estate, but probably many sales industries or the sales sector of industries is male dominant. There's been many comments on some of these TV shows these days that it's hard to succeed as a woman in real estate. Surely you were privy to that in your early years. How's it been for you?
Actually, really good. It's not that often that I come up against that. Things have changed. They really have, and I really do feel like they've changed a lot even over the last 5 years that I've been in real estate sales. I attended the ARIC conference. I know you guys were up there as well, the largest real estate conference in the Southern Hemisphere, just last week. And looking around, I have to say I was really taken aback that about 50% of the attendees were women. It's changed a lot there, it really has. Do I come up against do I have issues working in real estate sales, which I guess ordinarily has been a male-dominated industry? No. Women absolutely bring a lot to the table. There is no doubt about it. There's an empathy that we can bring to the table that is just, I think it's hard for guys to beat.
I love that. It's like almost I prepared you for that answer, because what I was about to say is that what we find internally at Shore Financial, the female brokers versus the male brokers, consumers naturally trust women more than men. The salesman does tend to have a bit of a connotation with being a salesman where you can't really 100% trust what they're saying. Some people sometimes think, oh, he's a shark and he's out for his commission check or whatnot. Where there's that motherly empathy from a woman where you naturally trust a woman more than a man.
Agreed.
When I deal with a service provider, when it's a man on the phone, sometimes I'm questioning, is this accurate what they're telling me? Are they just fobbing me off right now? That doesn't sound right.
I agree. I agree. And look, on that, I can say that I truly do believe that I have been awarded a number of listings because I've been a woman. Some of my elderly female clients, they just that for them is just a security for them that I'm a female agent.
You've actually owned it as your point of difference and used it to your advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It's just what some of us women do naturally.
And when you said that 5 years ago there's been a clear change, or there's been a big shift, what do you think's changed in 5 years? What's been the offers environment or market environment that's made it more?
So when I came into real estate sales, and look, I'd been in the background of our business for 15 years before I decided that I was going to launch headfirst into real estate sales, which allowed me to observe a lot, right, sitting on the sidelines. And there were so many things that just frustrated me.
I was just about to say, I imagine you're getting frustrated. Yeah.
There really was. And I was forever saying to myself, if I ever get into real estate sales, this is what I'm going to do. And I had said that to myself a number of times. I really felt like our industry was stuck in a time warp for a very, very long time. Auction timelines, 4 weeks. Everything was slow. You put an email inquiry through and you'd be lucky if that agent got back to you within 3 days. A lot of agents just weren't leveraging off social media.
I feel like there's still businesses that are still stuck in that time warp, and it's amazing for such a mature industry that people are still doing archaic processes from 20 years ago, right?
I agree.
And they're not doing the traditional basic initiatives or activities like calling your buyers from the weekend.
Agreed.
It's amazing. I go through open homes and I give my name and number, and I want to hear what they call me and say the following week, and half the time I don't even get called.
You don't hear. It's quite unbelievable. And if you look at the way we are as humans now, 5 years down the line, what are our expectations? Because forget about asking the agents what's right. You've got to ask the people what they want. Have a look at the way you order an Uber. as opposed to how
Yeah.
we used to order a taxi.
Yeah.
But even how we order Ubers, if you're on an Uber app and you're waiting for a car to arrive in 15 minutes, you'll literally cancel that. You'll pay a few dollars extra to get the Uber there in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Same with the way we order food. You're
Yeah.
like, I feel like pizza, but I can have Thai here, like within 10 minutes. So that's what I'm going to go for.
So, it's funny. You're now touching on, I guess, technology and how it's disrupted the way consumers behave, right?
Yeah.
We live in such a more fast-paced society. People want things now. Convenience is such a huge element in your service that you're providing in any industry, really. Here at Shaw, for example, we've got this podcast room because it's also become a video conferencing room because people don't actually really want to meet face-to-face anymore. It's an inconvenience to have face-to-face meetings. They want to quickly hop on a Zoom.
Correct.
They want to do things, ASAP in the least amount of time possible. How have you seen that change also over the years, and what have you sort of introduced to embrace the change in way consumers interact?
So many things. So many things. So, as I said, rewind back 5 years, that was probably one of the biggest things that I observed looking into the industry from the outside. The timelines for everything was slow. And so I figured if I could just speed everything up for people, I would create happy customers everywhere. So why did it take 2 weeks to get a property on the market? Why did it take agents so long to get back to people, if at all? There was just so many things there, and speed is without a doubt the new commodity. So I just thought, I'm just going to outwork and outpace everyone.
But is that down to sort of human, work ethic rather than technology? As in, like, speed in that listing process. Do you think that you've introduced technology that's really sped up the process?
Without a doubt, social media.
Social media.
Everything changed with that. So when I sort of, as I said, I came in with this speed of service mentality. I'm literally going to over-service clients with getting things done quickly. So I was winning hearts there, and then I leveraged off social media. So getting a photographer, Theo, through a property was slow. Getting a property to market was slow. Waiting for the newspapers to come out once a week with the real estate section was slow. Now, I had clients calling saying, we need our property on the market. How can we do this fast? And I said, well, I've got this thing called an iPhone, and I can get your property out to the world immediately. In fact, I call it instant media.
And do you feel that you're now sort of engaging with buyers and actually selling properties a lot more online through your organic sort of social channels rather than these paid platforms? It also costs a fortune, and you're at the beck and call of how they want to position your ad too, right?
Yes. So now, I just want to make it really clear. I absolutely still use the paid portals. There is a place for the portals. If I feel that I can make my clients more money by getting them onto the portals, that will absolutely be my recommendation. However, when you see people looking down on their phones at bus stops, I'm sorry to say, but they're not looking at realestate.com and Domain. They're on social media. And if you just follow those eyeballs, you'll work out where you need to be.
100%.
So, social media absolutely did change everything. Yes, I do sell an enormous amount of my properties off social media, but it always comes back to, what do the people want? Because the people, being your clients and your tribe, they're the ones that vote. They're saying, we love that we get to see property first off your social media.
Also, when they're in a casual sort of browsing headspace on the bus or at the bus stop, looking at their social channels. Just 2 points that I want to touch on. So the first thing, obviously, yes, you do need to still use the real estate portals, but I guess everyone's using the real estate portals. So you introduced the socials as a point of difference, right? On the socials, we're talking obviously Facebook and Instagram, right? Well, they're one of the two these days.
Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok.
And TikTok as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And what about YouTube?
We do use YouTube. I personally don't use it as much. there's definitely an audience there, but
So-
I don't use it as much.
And from what I witness here in our business, yeah, these platforms are only going to be as good as the time and effort you put toward them, right? As in
Correct.
TikTok, for example. If you're going to use TikTok, you need to be engaging on TikTok and handling an inquiry, right? Like your
Absolutely.
questions that arise, you need to respond straight away.
Correct.
Is it quite a time-consuming
Yes.
activity,
It is,
right?
yeah. You've got to commit. You really do. One of the biggest things I'm often saying when I'm training people on how to do this sort of stuff on social media is that you've got to be consistent. So for me, consistency is about 3 to 5 hours a day.
Wow.
3 to 5 hours a day.
Does anyone help you with that?
No, I do it all myself.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's, look, there's the magic there in itself because it's not going to be great. I'm not a content creator. I don't really want it to be polished. I'd rather get it out there raw but fast.
So it looks real. So that's actually a great segue to one of my questions I wanted to talk about. I was going to ask you about ARIC and, what you thought of ARIC, just for all the people in the country that were probably contemplating whether they should go,
Yeah.
because our database is full of homeowners and borrowers, but also real estate professionals that work with us. The reason that's a good segue to ARIC is because Reese Witherspoon was one of the key speakers there at ARIC, and she touched on exactly what you just said about the content that you create for socials. It can't be too polished.
Correct.
It can't be something that's all about how you want to portray yourself. Don't think about trying to look like the rock star real estate agent or trying to look like the perfect housewife. It's about creating content that you need to connect with your followers and think,
Yeah.
how are they going to feel when they see this? And that is the most, I feel like, insightful thing that I heard that day. Her and Ryan Serhant
Amazing.
were amazing.
They were amazing.
But yeah, it's she said that, because she's quite a businesswoman, right? She's got that.
Phenomenal.
She's got that.
I think that surprised us all.
Yeah, it did. I have to
Right?
say.
Because we're all thinking she's this big Hollywood actress. No one actually knew she was this incredible entrepreneur.
Yeah, she had a business with 130 staff. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, but so that content comment, creating real content that doesn't look too produced, doesn't look too polished, and
Yeah.
and the key message there I took from that was making sure that you think about the person on the other end, your audience. What are they going to feel when they see that, right? And is that pretty much your approach, by the sound of
Without a
things?
doubt, without a doubt. Look, the thing is that when you're putting yourself out there onto social media, people just want to see the real you. Because I'm a real estate agent. I'm not a rock star.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not out there to be a TikTok influencer. I'm out there to be Lisa Novak and offer a service to my clients. I want people to know that when they see Lisa Novak on their Instagram and then when they meet her in real life, it is actually the same person.
So on that note, that's why I think it's also important that you mix a bit of professional and personal content, right? Do you do that?
Look, I do. I mean, yes, and I agree with you, but it should be how you want it to be.
But you want to put your personality
I
on.
think you need a little bit of that in there. I
Yeah.
really do.
Who
I
is
was-
Lisa Novak? You know what I mean?
I agree. What actually happens? I mean, literally now I was just, 20 minutes before I came up here, Theo, I was sitting in my car. I had a coffee in my, coffee holder. I had my notebook on my lap. I had my pen there. I mean, I've got a million things going, but that's literally life.
Yeah.
Right? It's actually the real estate agent life, much like probably the brokerage life. It's not that glamorous. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. I love to document that. I do.
So I probably didn't even sing out your accolades as much as I should have. So you're top 50 women in real estate, top 100 across the country, with an industry now, I think, what is the size of the real estate? It's like 70,000, I believe, or something?
Yeah.
Huge real estate industry, and you're in the top 100, which is an amazing achievement. Congrats.
Thank you. Thanks.
So let's talk about ARIC. Did you feel, someone as successful as you in the industry already? Did you get value out of that? Do you highly recommend it?
So I go to get one golden nugget.
What's that?
That's what I go for, and I go looking for it. It's much like, you know, anything. If you go into a diet or, you know, doing an exercise regime, and, you know, the personal trainer comes at you with the 3,000 different exercises, you're probably not going to do them all. And I go in with that mindset into any of these conferences. Just look for one golden nugget. But there is so much that you can get out of these conferences, but it can be overwhelming. It really can.
And it can get a little bit information overload, right? You know, I felt by the second day you've sat in a big conference room for, you know, basically 48 hours almost, and it can be overwhelming a little bit. On that note, though, I want to know, what was the golden nugget?
The golden nugget actually was something that I wasn't even really looking for. So there was a guy by the name of Tom Ferry.
Oh, yep.
Did you see Tom?
Yeah,
He was amazing. So he talked about doing this DL card, which had no marketing on it at all. So it was just a black card with a QR code. And when you QR'd the code, people could get their property value very quickly, which I do. I do a 3-minute SMS appraisal for people's properties. But I loved the no marketing. Again, I like to do things against the grain. I like that it didn't have a real estate agent all over it. And sometimes, you know, real estate marketing can be a bit cheesy. It had nothing.
And it's all the same.
No marketing. I loved it.
It's normally all the same too, the real estate marketing. Yeah, I think in any industry, you've got to stand out from the crowd and do something completely different.
Exactly.
Even if it's a bit strange and obscured, like what's going on there?
I agree.
So when you say blank QR code, you said you do something similar for a 3-minute appraisal. How do you do an appraisal on a property that you might not have gone through?
Yeah. So it is a sight unseen appraisal, and I'm always very upfront about that. So we promote that campaign in just 3 minutes. I can appraise your property. SMS me through your property address to my mobile number. I grab that data, which is very valuable data for a real estate agent, and I plug that into RP data. There is a little button on there that allows you to produce a report. I send that report back to the prospective vendor with a quick little text that says, please note it's sight unseen. If you would like something a little bit more accurate, just respond with a yes so I can walk through your property in 5 minutes.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, that's new age real estate service right there.
Yep.
All right, so enough about the real estate industry as such. Let's talk about the bigger hot topic right now, the real estate market, the property market. You know, there is a lot of hysteria out there around the property market crashing, rates getting a little bit obscene. You're on the front line, just like us.
Yeah.
You're dealing with 3 different channels of consumers. You've got your buyers, you've got your vendors, and you've also got your landlords, right? What are you hearing, seeing, feeling? Well, then we might get into the million-dollar question of your forecast of what's next.
So this is changing week by week. We haven't seen a market like this before. We've never seen stock levels this low on the northern beaches. Currently, they're sitting at about 480 for properties on the market.
And what is it normally for the past, say, 5 years?
At least double.
At least double.
Yeah. So stock levels are the lowest we've ever seen them in the history of our business. But buyer numbers are the complete opposite. We are seeing buyers everywhere, which sounds absolutely crazy given the fact that we've just had all of these interest rate rises. We rewind back 6 months and it was the complete opposite. We had no oversupply of stock and we had no buyers around.
It was completely the opposite.
Right? And I'm sure you guys are seeing similar figures. It was the fear of the unknown. You know, the buyers knew at that stage that there was going to be sequential interest rate rises. They didn't know when they were going to stop. Now it's the question of, we just had one more. Is that the last one? Is there going to be just one more? They're thinking there's probably not going to be another 12.
So I guess because there's so much messaging, you know, from the news and all the major bank economists are sort of putting their forecasts on interest rates forward and online and public, left, right, and centre. So I think people know that this is, you know, toward the peak of rate rises. There might be another one too, but if they can afford the repayments now's the time to probably transact, because they, you know, irrespective of the crazy boom that we've just come out of, that last sort of COVID boom
Yep.
over the last 2-3 years, there was still a lot of people who missed out. There's still a lot of
Correct.
buyers on the sidelines and pent-up demand that are waiting for an opportune time. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but some people were rubbing their hands thinking this might be a better time to buy for a bit of a bargain, but they're not getting those bargains anymore. The bargains are gone. They were last year, right?
Correct. So, don't forget the property market on the Northern Beaches, but in most parts of Sydney, came off about 20%. It went up 30% and came off 20%.
Which is a lot.
Which is a lot. And it was dramatic as well when it did come. It was dramatic when the property market went up, but it was just as dramatic when it came off. Now, the buyers know that the bottom of the market was probably about November, December.
Just leading into Christmas, yeah.
Correct. We don't have dates in our calendars. No one knows when the market's going to go up and when it's going to come down. So they know that was the bottom of the market. Now it's sort of only one way from here, and the market's just heading up.
And let's also highlight a 20% correction is a pretty unheard of correction, right?
That quickly?
Yeah,
Yes.
that quickly.
Yeah.
If we look back, there was that credit crunch leading into the Royal Commission around 2018-19, where there was a small correction, maybe of 5-10%. And even in the GFC, in the global financial crisis, which is known as one of the biggest sort of market corrections, definitely in equities in the stock market, but in America property. But here, we only actually came off 7%.
Yes.
So the 20% outshines the GFC, almost threefold. So given that, right, so we've had a correction, there's pent-up demand, stock levels are about half. The question we get asked all the time is there now going to be a whole lot of vendors that have been procrastinating about listing coming to the market, hopefully in the spring season? Spring is typically the best season for buying a home. There's the most amount of stock. Is it looking that way? Are you having those conversations, and that's what you're going to be seeing?
So again, this market's changing week by week. Even real estate agents who are on the ground, and I'm transacting an enormous amount of property on the Northern Beaches, are finding this market really hard to read. And it changes with every one of those interest rate pauses, increases, whatever's going on there. However, I do want to say that in the last couple of days, since that interest rate was announced, I have had a number of investors contacting me saying, we're done, we're out. We've got to sell.
Wow.
So I feel like that one has tipped the majority of people that I've been dealing with. Yeah, I do believe we're going to see more stock hitting the market. Are we going to see an avalanche of it? I don't believe so. Ordinarily, spring's a busy time. I don't think we're going to see this avalanche of stock coming on. I don't. People are just genuinely nervous, Theo. They really are.
Yeah, everyone's sitting on the sidelines. That's why there is less activity and less sales.
Correct.
To your point, in the Northern Beaches market, it sounds like roughly 50% less stock across the country. CoreLogic's data shows about 25%, 24.4, I think to be exact, less stock across the country in new listings for this period, for this quarter, compared to the 5-year average.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not comparing it to the COVID boom. It's not comparing it to some crazy times, 5-year average. So there's definitely a attitude of just, I'll wait and see what happens next.
Everyone's in a holding pattern.
But even so, you were touching on, a bit of mortgage pain, a bit of people tapping out from, where now their repayments are at, which is infamously referred to as the mortgage cliff, which is this $370 billion worth of fixed rate loans coming to maturity between June this year and July next year, over that 12-month period, where we're probably seeing people come off 2% interest rates to 5.5%, 6% potentially, even if there's another 1 or 2 rate rises. We're having, I feel like this day and age, homeowners are very acute with their finance. They're well aware of these upcoming changes, and they're planning ahead, right?
Okay, that's interesting to hear.
We're having conversations where they're either saying, I'm going to need to look at selling. They're not going to let themselves getting into a distressed situation. or they're rejigging their finances. A lot of people we saw in COVID actually went from maybe having an apartment that they were thinking about upsizing for the family home to instead keeping the apartment and moving to
Yeah,
regional areas like
correct.
the Central Coast, Southern Highlands, South Coast, even up to Queensland, Noosa, and having a bigger home out of the city and having a small
Yeah,
home like an apartment in the city because of the change in the work from home arrangements.
that's right.
Some of these people are just now planning accordingly, and they're just saying, well, I can't afford to own both properties in this current interest rate
That's
environment,
right.
and they're just selling one of the two properties, but it's not really a crazy distressed situation, right? They're
Well, no, and I think this is part of the bigger picture, is that the buyers last year were saying we're just going to wait because the market's probably going to keep coming off. And we said, guys, how much further do you think the market can come down? And then in the beginning of the year, they were like, we're just going to wait because there's going to be a lot of distressed selling. And then that didn't happen. And so this is what has just compounded and compounded with these buyers. And now we're seeing a bit of a frenzy out there on the streets where we were seeing one, maybe two bidders at auctions last year, at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. Now we're seeing 5 to, I mean, I had an auction last Saturday, I had 21 registered bidders. The auction the week prior had 18 registered bidders. We're seeing big numbers. We're definitely not seeing yet this distress selling. We're starting to have some conversations, but I wouldn't be relying on the avalanche of property that some buyers think are going to hit the market.
And a distressed sale is only really a nightmare when there's no one really around to buy it, right? It's the difference between that 20% correction last year was, to your point that you just touched on, there were only one or two serious bidders or purchasers on a particular property that was going to market, especially around the election last year. This year,
Yeah.
there's a queue of bidders desperately waiting to buy one of the few properties that are for sale, right? So
Absolutely.
even if there's a bit of grief, that it's just being met with too much demand.
But then we also add to the equation that borders are back open again. And, we have people that are returning from overseas. That's happening. Are they coming through in the droves? No. But are there people that are coming from overseas and are they buying here? They are. Yes.
So that great, another segue to my next question.
We just spend all day in here.
Yeah. This
We've
is
got so
just
many things to discuss.
We're free flowing here, so naturally. So, housing issue,
Yeah.
housing crisis, this migration comment. People
Yes.
are thinking that why are we opening up the floodgates to migration when we can't even house citizens here? I disagree. I think we need more migration, and it's good to have some more workers and a higher population. But there is an issue, and especially in New South Wales, especially in Sydney. It's hard for developers to build homes. There's only limited pockets to build homes. There's that northwest corridor, that southwest corridor, as opposed to Brisbane and Melbourne. You can sort of pretty much build all around the city. You're in an area, the Northern Beaches, there is a fair bit of development going on, especially in DY. You've probably seen DY completely change over that 20 years, right?
We have.
And there's also that the infamous Northern Beaches tunnel that got approved and
25
disapproved.
years they've been talking about it.
Yeah, they actually started construction. I read something actually last week that there was something like 23 of 48 proposed homes that they actually purchased and to start construction, and then that got sort of
Yeah.
terminated when the Premier...
With the new government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, firstly, the housing issue and development, what you're seeing in your marketplace, and things like those infrastructure projects are so crucial, right?
Absolutely. And you're quite right. I mean, it's been tough. It's been really hard. First of all, we just don't have that land. And I'm talking about on the Northern Beaches, but even if you look at, areas like the eastern suburbs or here where we are in the city, there's no land. But, it's been very, very hard for these developers to even be able to build costs. Materials are up by 40%. I've just been on the Gold Coast last week, as I mentioned, at the real estate conference. I felt like every second property there was a crane.
It's
I could
so
not
true.
believe the amount of developing that was going on there.
And high density developments, right? That's the big point of difference.
Unbelievable.
Like in DY,
Yeah.
there's been some sort of more high density, but in majority of Sydney, you can only build sort of 3-4 levels out of the ground in
Correct.
suburban areas.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because in DY, it felt like the whole suburb was under construction, but it was all happening on the main arterial road, on Pittwater Road. You push down all those side streets, there's nothing's changed since the 1970s, more or less. We've had a few little developments here and there in the 90s, but a lot of it was happening on the main arterial road. But again, the tallest tower that's there is Meriton, and that's 16 floors. So there just are no high rises there.
Well, Harry Sugarboff
I
did.
was just going to say that.
Yeah, he did actually say recently, High Rise Harry, who is most infamously known as only sticking to Sydney for his residential developments.
Yeah.
He said it's so hard and restrictive to build units in Sydney that he's now, in the last few years, been focusing on Queensland and Gold Coast and other opportunities, just because there's the feasibility stack up there. The governments are supportive; they help you get things over the line. And he made a famous comment. He goes, "If I can't do it, no one can."
No, that's right. And you know what? That is actually his solution to so many things. That is his. He keeps saying, forget about trying to get inflation under control. Build vertically, because this is the issue right here. Rents are going up. Investors are getting out of the market because it's just too tough, which is pushing rents up. And we've got no properties being built. So, this is, and we just keep hitting brick walls everywhere.
And we've made it tough for investors to actually own a property with different sort of lending regulation, different interest rates on investors. It's not attractive anymore,
It's
right?
not.
Yeah. No, that's some valid points. The other thing, Harry talks about vertically integrating, or if that's what you're saying, where you build to rent, right? A lot of developers have gone now down a path. Instead of building to sell units, they're building to rent because of that rental crisis. And two major factors, the two biggest factors toward inflation were rental prices and housing prices. Two major things that contributed to inflation being a major increase. So I can't remember what the rental increase was, but the housing increase was an annual average of 8.9. So this goes back to your point. We need to build vertically, let developers add more units to markets, add more housing. So then it suppresses some of the cost of living sort of issues that some people are having because there's more options and stock on the market, right?
Yeah. They're just, and this is an issue. There are no options out there. I mean, when we look at rents again on the northern beaches, and I know that it's affected most parts of the country. Rents hadn't gone up on the northern beaches for quite some time. If you look at just the very conventional 2-bedroom apartment in DY, the rental on a 2-bedroom apartment had been sitting for a good 6 years at about $5 to $5.50 a week. And you can still, I was actually just having a look just before I came in here. You can still get a modest 2-bedroom apartment in DY for about $6.15 a week.
One of the new ones?
No. You're going to get an original one. The new properties, on the other hand, they're getting enormous rent. I actually just went through one yesterday because I'm selling one in DY. It's about 6 months old, and the tenant in there is paying $1,050 a week
For a 2-bedroom.
for a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment in DY.
So that's actually a good point to highlight. So despite a market that's had good supply, and we're talking about that DY property market now, so a lot of people argue, oversupply can then, also be an issue for investors because they can't rent their properties. The rental yields don't appreciate because there's more stock being added.
Yeah.
But you've been privy to an area that's been developed a lot, a huge amount of additional housing, you could say, added to that market. But there's still been price growth and rental growth, right?
Enormous. there certainly has been. And then what we were seeing a lot of tenants saying, I want to move out of the old two-bedder that I'm in, and I'd like to try and get into a new one. So there was a lot of this movement happening. But yeah, without a doubt. I mean, look, if, and I'm constantly saying this, nothing has changed in the last 100 years in real estate, and nothing's going to change in the next 100 years. That is not a bad sort of blanket rule when you apply it. Because if you look at a graph, and I'm not much of a data girl, I've had to train myself to really look at the data because it's fascinating. If you have a look at the data over the last 40 years, it is like a roller coaster. It's sort of, it's like
It's
this.
always like that, isn't it?
It's like this. It's like a
Yeah.
heartbeat, but it grows. No one bought a property 40 years ago and it didn't grow in value. I don't care where you are in the country.
It's always one trajectory.
It is resilient.
Yeah.
It's resilient.
So, on the topic of development and supply and redeveloping neighbourhoods, so
Yeah.
I feel like the retail in DY in particular that's completely changed. It's been a great change, not just for DY but for all the neighbouring suburbs. There's now better restaurants, cafes.
Yeah.
A lot of people are anti this. A lot of people don't like change. There was the Northern Beaches tunnel that we just touched on. It was objected to by most. The reason it didn't go ahead, was mainly because of there was the argument
Yeah.
about the numbers, but also that there was a huge sort of protest against it by the locals.
The
What's that?
Insular Peninsula.
The Insular Peninsula.
The
What
Insular
the hell is
Peninsula.
going on there?
The locals, look, and if you ask country people, do they want, their beautiful country towns to be, regentrified, you're going to have the same answer. It's exactly what you said, Theo. People don't like change. You look at an area like DY, and Meriton came along, and they built in what we call the centre of DY, and they just completely regentrified it and turned it into a real cosmopolitan hub.
And then that's when all the other developers followed suit, right? They were one of the first.
More or less. I wouldn't say they were one of the first, but they were probably one of the bigger ones that made one of the biggest changes in that area. And they cleaned it up in many respects, and they turned it into, as I mentioned, a cosmopolitan hub. They brought with it a flagship Woolworths store and some great, wonderful restaurants and eateries that weren't really around that part of town, and cleaned it up. And now when I sell in Meriton DY, I actually call it the happiest place on earth. People love it.
The other
Absolutely love it there.
The other area that I want to touch on, because whilst we operate across Australia, our core market Sydney, and we're having conversations with people from Wollongong to Newcastle to the Blue Mountains about their purchasing decisions, and a suburb that is coming up across the board from people living all over Sydney and thinking about moving to is Avalon.
Yeah.
Avalon is this hot market, I feel, which is amazing because there's not that many homes there. I feel we've watched Avalon. That was one of the suburbs that almost, I think it went up something like 67%, almost doubled,
Yeah,
right?
it's unbelievable.
And it's come back a fair bit. It took a pretty aggressive correction, probably more than 20, I think. And then now it's buoyant again. What other trends are you seeing like Avalon in the Northern Beaches, where people are moving from more high density sort of areas like the eastern suburbs, lower North Shore or inner west, and trying to get a bit of land, you could say, in the Northern Beaches? What are the major faves?
There's been so many, but you're quite right. We've seen a huge movement, and COVID had a lot to do with that, where people who had never considered the Northern Beaches before, all of a sudden were going, hang on a sec, we can sell our 2-bedroom apartment in Bondi, and we can go and buy a beautiful house on the Northern Beaches, and we can still live a great lifestyle. I only need to travel into the office now 2 or 3 times a week. There's great schools. We've got a great hospital, the Northern Beaches Hospital. Things changed a lot because of COVID. So what are the areas? There's so many of them, but the big factor that I see, the common factor, is that they still want that accessibility back into the CBD.
Well, that's why a lot of the price growth was really concentrated around the lower end of the northern beaches being around Manly for the ferry, right?
Yeah, well, Manly's always been expensive, but areas like Balgowlah. I mean, I just sold a knockdown house in Balgowlah Heights last week at auction. I had 21 bidders there, and that went for 2.71 million.
So I know this sounds ridiculous, but 2.71, did you say?
Correct.
2.71 million for a, what was it? Probably, I'm guessing, a 3-4 bedroom house?
It was a very, very modest 3-bedroom house. It was a knockdown. I mean, most buyers were suggesting that it wasn't livable.
And how big was the block size?
About 550.
See, from my perspective, I might sound crazy, but that seems like decent value, because even for the land of 550 square meters,
Great.
you can these days get one of those those display home, kid home type builders, which are building great homes these days, to build an amazing home on that block for anywhere between 750, call it, to 1.2, depending on how crazy you want to go.
Yeah.
And you've got probably a $4-5 million property, right?
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. So, those areas are very appealing because, again, you ask someone like yourself, and that sounds like it's quite reasonably priced. That was quite big money on the northern beaches.
For a knockdown, yeah.
For a knockdown. But Balgowlah and Balgowlah Heights, they are what we deem as expensive areas on the northern beaches. You certainly can move into an area like French's Forest, where you're going to get bigger blocks, and you can still pick up houses around that sort of $1.9 to $2 million.
Which it's just once you cross Spit Bridge, that's not even possible, right? Once you're in the lower North Shore, if you cross the Harbour Bridge and go into the inner west or eastern suburbs, you're getting maybe a 100 square metre terrace or semi or townhouse for that price.
And that's the appeal. So a lot of families were saying, we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to sell the 2-bedroom apartment in Bondi for very similar money, and they're moving over and they're buying a lovely home on the northern beaches. It's a great lifestyle. It's safe. As I said, you've got great education, you've got great shops, you've got everything around you that you could possibly need and more. And then they're literally on the freeway and they're back into the eastern suburbs in 25, 30 minutes.
So that's touching on some trends there. So something that we're seeing across the business is probably the young families making those decisions, right? They were, in their youth, living close to the city, happy to live in a small apartment. Maybe after their first or second child, they've realised we need some space.
We need a yard.
We need some grass. Yeah. We don't want a balcony for the kids. We want a proper yard. And they just can't afford to buy the yard in those those higher, more affluent, I should say, suburbs. And that's probably the trend of people going to those areas like the northern beaches, right? Young families, normally dual incomes these days, right? And they can afford to be a bit aggressive on buying something that they might also want to renovate. So hence the crazy price on a knockdown, because young families these days, I feel like before this renovation sort of issue with building costs going through the roof, everybody has been watching these TV shows like The Block and have become renovators, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But look, there's many micro markets on the northern beaches. There really are. And as I said, you can push up to Avalon and you can still get I've actually got a house coming on there next week, but, and that's going to be guiding 1.9 million. So you can still live in these beautiful areas where you've got this great cosmopolitan hub. DY is still relatively affordable, when you're comparing it to other areas like we've just mentioned, particularly the eastern suburbs.
So 1.9 in Avalon that you've got coming on next week, I'm guessing it's pretty much walking distance to the beach, right? Because the whole of Avalon almost is.
Absolutely.
And
all those great restaurants.
And what's the block size on that?
The block size on that is about a 700 square metre.
So to me, that seems like great value, and I can understand why people with
I think I heard an offer.
young kids are going that way. Lastly, I just want to touch on some of the schemes that have changed, first home buyers. So, on the units and maybe some of the cheaper stock towards the northern end of the northern beaches, the first home buyer choice scheme would have been great for your first home buyers, right? Did you see many people taking action on this scheme? What do you think about this? The changes. So the changes are no more annual land tax instead of stamp duty, which means that people need a more significant deposit to purchase the property again.
Yeah.
And they're just lifting the waiver from 650 up to 800, and between 800 to a million it tiers back in. In Sydney, you know, a lot of properties are above that $800,000 mark, and it's quite tough for first home buyers then, because they're still having to pay stamp duty, right?
I agree. So it hasn't been as successful as you would think it would be, Theo. It's quite unusual, and I don't know what you guys are seeing. Certainly we've had people taking advantage, but I remember back in the sort of GFC time, and there was at that time, and don't quote me on this, but there was some sort of a first home buyer incentive.
The grant, yeah.
Yeah, there was the grant. And I remember that being enormously successful. We literally couldn't list enough of these little lead-in properties for these first home buyers. They'd come in and they'd walk straight out the door. We're not finding that this time around. And I just think that that is purely because it is so hard for these first home buyers to get into the market. If we have a look at what a lead-in property on the Northern Beaches looks like, you know, you used to be able to pick up apartments there, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, starting at about $450,000. Now your lead-in property is sitting at about $600 to $650,000. So I just think these guys, they just can't afford it. And I don't think that the incentives are good enough.
So once again, perfect answer there almost. It's like I prepared you for that, because I can relate to exactly what you're referring to.
But it's true.
We found that the first home buyer choice scheme, where you could opt in for the annual land tax as opposed to the upfront stamp duty, it was officially released in January. And for the last 6 months, no one really knew about it. And we were releasing so much content. We even did podcasts like this with people discussing the matter, and it wasn't really being promoted enough, endorsed enough, and recognised enough. The key thing, the messaging, in my opinion, was a little bit wrong. People just heard annual land tax, and they thought, this is another way for the government to tax me on an annual basis. The tax is going to increase. But, you know, we did numbers that even if they factored in 2.5% growth on the land, it would be like 14 years before the annual tax became more than
that's right.
the upfront stamp duty. So it was a great initiative. And you're so right about 2008, the GFC, the first home buyers grant, which was only, I think, around $14,000, $15,000.
Correct.
There was also a waiver
right.
on stamp duty, but the waiver, I think, capped out also around $750 back at the time. But the grant itself, that actually was so much more recognised and endorsed, and it made such a bigger effect. I think because of the political status we're in right now between Labor and Liberal really arguing the last few years, it's like they kiboshed a great initiative and people didn't know what was right or wrong for them, right?
I agree. And also, it's been so hard to understand. I mean, you know...
It's too convoluted for first home buyers.
It's too hard. And that's often what I, found with a lot of finance, mortgage, real estate related topics. And I like to think that we kind of break things down in easy to digest bite-sized nuggets for people. I find that that's much the same here. Most people are just going, wait, what? What? So what is it? And how does it work? And it's been changing so much that even as real estate agents, we're like, hang on a sec. So what, it changed again? And what is it? And if you've ever tried to Google first home buyer grant, try to do that.
Oh,
see what information you
so
find.
So much information
it's
that comes up. It's overwhelming. And to your point about the stamp duty sort of waiver, discount, whatever you want to call it, with the choice scheme and the annual land tax, they released so many discussion papers over the years with different mechanisms and systems that they were suggesting. So to your point about hopping on Google, there's so many news articles that actually outline incentives or structures that never actually came to fruition.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like, oh, that sounds great. Oh, no, it's not available anymore.
Yeah, and like things like they were saying that, one thing that we had consumers quite worried about is that if they bought a property and opted in for the annual land tax, that if they sold the property, let's say within 4 or 5 years, are they going to have to pay back 2/3 of the stamp duty that they didn't pay in the first place? And there was a discussion paper from the state government saying that was the case about 2 years ago. There is articles online saying that this is the case. But the most recent incentive didn't actually have that. You would only pay 1/3 of the stamp duty if you sold in, call it, roughly 4 or 5 years. So it was.
But again, if you just draw back to what I said at the beginning of the segment, if you just listen to what the people want, what do the people want? They're not taking up the offer. Maybe it's not working. Try something different because that did work. The incentive that was offered back when the GFC took place, clearly it worked. I mean, I remember it, and I wasn't even in real estate sales at the time.
Well, it's just a straight up cash injection to help you buy a property. That clearly,
that's what the people want.
That sounds good. That's going to work. It's no red tape. There's no ifs and buts and T's and C's.
It wasn't complicated. It was if you fit into this box, you can get X amount of money. And people went, "That's great. That's me. Thank you. I'll take it."
Well, Lisa, you have been a fantastic guest on this podcast.
Pleasure.
I actually think you're one of the longest guests we've had on air in this podcast. So,
love that.
And I could keep going. There was actually some more questions I wanted to touch on, but all the more reason that we might have to do this again sometime.
We may need a part 2.
Part 2. So thanks again for coming on board.
Pleasure.
It's been a great session, and look forward to doing this again.
Likewise. Thanks, Theo.